Something so strange happened in this barn that will leave you wondering as to who would do such a thing and why would they do it. In history, there are stories we can't explain, mysteries that keep us guessing. Welcome to Mysteries Unfolded, where we unfold puzzling tales from the past. Back in the 1920s, there was a farmstead located in southern Germany, which was a very rural and isolated part of the country. The occupants of this farm were the Gruber family and their live-in maid. The Gruber family consisted of Andreas, age 63, his wife Cecilia, age 72, their widowed daughter Victoria, age 35, Victoria's children Cecilia, age 7, and Josef, age 2. Their maid's name was Maria Baumgartner, age 44. Everything was going fine for this family until the winters of 1921, when some really strange things started happening on their farm. Their live-in maid was free a lot of the times during the day when she was not doing any chores around the property. She was the first person to notice the strange happenings on the property. In the main house, she started to notice tappings like a knocking sound in the walls. Yes, in the walls, not around the walls or behind the walls, literally in the walls. And she would go and inspect, but she couldn't make sense about where these tappings were coming from. Then, she started hearing a combination of strange voices and whispers coming from the attic. She told Andreas multiple times that, hey, someone might be in your attic. Andreas inspected the attic many times, but not only did Andreas find absolutely nothing, but also the attic was completely empty. So even if a person was in the attic, they couldn't hide behind something. Also, there was not a single clue that someone could be hiding there because there was no food, no footsteps marks, nothing. And so, over the course of several weeks, the maid repeatedly would tell Andreas about the strange noises, footsteps, and knocking. And Andreas would frustratedly go and check, and there would be nothing. Andreas would not believe her because he couldn't find anything that indicating what she was saying. But the maid was persistent on this matter. She really did believe that something strange was happening in the property. Eventually, she said to the Gruber family that, sorry, I can't take this anymore. Whenever I am here, I feel like I am being watched and strange things keep happening. I can't sleep because of the footsteps in the attic. Although I know you have checked, but I can't stay in this house anymore. She left. The Gruber family was shocked because they relied on her help. They had known her since ages. So, obviously, they were not happy with this news. Okay, so now they need a replacement. Because otherwise, who would do all the chores that their previous maid handled? Over the course of the next 6 months, they couldn't find any replacement. When the maid left, initially the family didn't notice anything strange like the maid had told them, because everybody was busy with their own chores, so they didn't even have time to consider that there were any sounds and strange noises. But eventually, Andreas would admit that he did hear the tapping sounds, the strange noises, and the footsteps coming from the attic. And now he's becoming paranoid. Interestingly enough now, the rest of the family is also starting to hear these sounds. Despite the family inspecting the whole property, they couldn't find anything. Everyone is now stressed, mad, and frustrated because they don't know where these sounds are coming from. So they accept this fact and try to focus on other things. But after some time, these footsteps, disembodied voices, and tappings turned into things going missing. The main thing they noticed that was missing were their house keys. And there are not many people in this house. So now they are all paranoid about these happenings around the property. When the keys got missing, the family began thinking if there was actually someone living inside their house who would do such a thing. And it was a very terrifying experience. And once, young Cecilia, one of the grandchildren, got missing, they all panicked and started to look for her everywhere. They are all running around, looking in the forest, inside the main house, on the property, but they couldn't find her. Thank God. Then finally they find her, and when they asked about where she was all exhausted and she didn't have any idea where she was and how she disappeared. She was confused. She didn't know what happened. She was like, I don't know what happened. And eventually they brought her to the living room to try and calm her down. And on the living room table, there was a newspaper that no one in the family subscribed to. A few days after this incident, they saw that clearly someone tried to break into their tool shed, which had very expensive tools housed in it. It looked like someone hacked into the metal lock outside the tool shed to try and break it open, but they lived in an isolated part of Germany where there isn't any ambient sound. So if someone did try to violently break the metal lock, they would have definitely heard it. But they didn't. It was all very confusing. But it would be what Andreas saw in the spring of 1922 that left him shook. This incident, which occurred in spring 1992, pushed Andreas and his family from general paranoia to outright panic. Andreas wakes up one morning and opens his back door and sees that there is a very long trail of footsteps coming from the forest, which is far away from his property. For context, his piece of land is also very large. But the strange thing about these footsteps is that they are coming inside his home from the back door, which means that someone from the forest has walked into his home, but there are no footsteps leading out of his home, which indicates that whoever or whatever has entered the house never left. After seeing this sight, Andreas was shook. Andreas looked around his property, but there were no other footsteps except these ones. If someone had come and left, then there would be a back trail of the footsteps, but in this case, there were none. So he immediately locks up his back door and wakes up his family, and he's like, "Hey, listen, why are there footprints leading to the back door, but there are no footsteps going back?" Which means someone came into the house from the back door but never left. He asks his daughter, his wife, his grandkids, but nobody has any clue about this. So he opens the door back up and he is investigating the footsteps, and he's like, "I just don't get it. If you left the house, there has to be a back trail. So this means that someone is inside the house." So he looks around the other exits of his house to see if someone exiting through there, which is still scary that someone entered through the back door and left from one of the exits. But there aren't any other footsteps. Okay, so now he's sure that this means someone is inside his home. So he starts to thoroughly check if someone might be hiding anywhere in the house. He goes to the attic, he goes to all the rooms, he checks everywhere, but there is nothing. The family at this point is also very confused by this occurrence. He locks everything up and begins to follow the trail of footprints that entered his home, back to where they came from. Okay, so now he's looking and looking. At this point, he is in the forest, but the footprints abruptly end. It seems like they magically appeared out of thin air into the forest and led to his house. And there is no clear beginning of these footsteps. After doing one more loop around his property, he's checking his attic, his rooms, his shed. He's checking literally everywhere. He couldn't find anything. So now he decided to talk about these occurrences, which had been happening since a few months now, with someone else. He talked with Lawrence Flittenbauer, who was the closest neighbor from his property, but he was still a couple hundred yards away because this area wasn't really populated. So he tells Lorenz everything. "You know, my maid quit because she was hearing sounds coming from the attic. We checked but couldn't find something. Then we also started hearing these sounds. My keys went missing, then my granddaughter disappeared. And then there was this newspaper that appeared out of nowhere. And now today, there were footsteps that originated from the forest and were leading into my home, but there was no back trail of these footsteps. I am very frustrated with these events. I can't make sense of anything right now." Then Lorenz, who also couldn't make sense of these events, was like, "Hey, I have some extra weapons that I own that you could use to protect yourself and arm yourself. Maybe borrow a rifle from me for the time being." And Andreas says, "You know what? I am probably overreacting. I don't need the rifle. I am good, but thanks for the offer and I will be fine." But as the future events unfold, we learn that Andreas would have been probably better off if he had taken Lorenz up for the offer. A couple of days after Andreas talked with his neighbor about the strange happenings on his property, the Gruber family got a good news in the depth of these creepy occurrences. Finally, 6 months after the original maid left, they were able to locate a new maid to replace the old one that had left due to the strange occurrences. A few weeks later, on March the 31st, 1992, the new maid arrived at their farm in Hinterkaifeck. But unfortunately, this would become the same date on which a very tragic event occurred at the Hinterkaifeck farm. Over the course of 24 hours, someone or something was able to silently lure the members of the Gruber family one by one into the barn without projecting any suspicion to the other members. The members would walk, like almost in a trance, one by one, on the Hinterkaifeck farm into the barn and get struck in the head by a tool called massacre, which is an axe-like tool, a hit to the head and put down to the ground. And whatever or whoever was in there would then square that member up and cover their dead body with hay. This process was carried out 4 times. And then the 2 members who were left in the farm, who were sleeping, were also struck by the massacre and murdered by the entity that had killed the other 4 members in the barn. 4 days later, on April 4th, a repair guy who had been scheduled to arrive at the Hinterkaifeck farm to repair the feeding machine arrived at the farm and began knocking on the front door. But there was no answer. He could hear the dogs barking, but he got no response from the other side of the door. The feeder was on a public side of the farm, so he didn't need the family to physically be there. After trying the front door, going to the back door, knocking on different doors, he got no response. He obviously knew how to fix the feeder, so he was like, you know what? I am just going to do the job. So he goes onto the area where the feeder was. And as he is fixing the feeder, he sees that the dog who was inside the house is now tied up outside the house. And he goes over to the house door, and he thinks now someone will surely see me. So he knocks on the door, but no one comes to the door. The back door, which was clearly used to let the dogs out, is now locked again. So he's like, oh, that's odd. So instead of just leaving without informing anybody, he goes to Lorenz and tells him that, hey, I was over at the Gruber's family farm. I fixed their feeder, but nobody answered the door. But the dogs were led outside during my job, so maybe someone is there. But if someone is there, why would they not answer the door? I don't know what's going on. So could you just let them know that I was there and I did the job? So Lorenz goes on and checks on the Grubers because he hasn't seen them since a couple of days. When Lorenz and his family got over to Hinterkaifeck, he saw that the dogs were tied outside, the doors of the house were locked, although the lights were still on, but the barn was unlocked. So when Lorenz gets into the barn, he smells this horrible smell coming from a pile of hay, and beneath that lied 4 of the bodies. They go inside the house and they find the remaining 2 bodies, although it looked like no one had been in the house lately. But when they went over to the kitchen, they found clues that indicated that someone was recently eating something in the kitchen. The fire was also lit. So Lorenz reported this incident to the authorities. The police were able to conclude with relative certainty that this incident took place on March 31st. Although the Gruber's family passed away 4 days before, but there was someone living in their house who was eating food, playing with the dogs, milking the cows, and lounging inside the house. They operated the farm for 4 days. The neighbors said they saw the smoke coming out of the chimney and the routine things happening inside Hinterkaifeck, so nobody suspected anything. Now it was confirmed that someone was living in this house. At first, the police suspected that it was somebody like a drifter who moved from place to place, and they saw an opportunity in this isolated farm. They were probably going to rob them and stay there for a couple of days and leave. But when they searched the house, there were large sums of cash spread out all over. So it probably wasn't a robbery because no robber would leave this much cash behind. So the police were confused about the motives of the oppressor. There were a lot of people in the town nearby who didn't particularly like Andreas, so the police suspected that someone from that town could be involved in this case. So they started interviewing people like crazy, but they couldn't come to any conclusions. The police thought that Lorenz could be the primary suspect, as he was the one who reported the case. And Lorenz also wanted to marry Victoria, the daughter of Andreas, but Andreas had denied his proposal. But how could Lorenz commit such a crime when he himself had a whole family to take care of in his own house? If he had killed the Gruber's family and then stayed in their house for 4 days, then obviously his family would have noticed his absence. So, the police, having no leads and suspects, concluded that whoever committed this crime was probably there for about 6 months, scouting the place potentially, and had stayed there for 4 days after committing the murders, and then vanished. And they have not been found even to this day. This case was also reopened in 2007, but despite the suspects and all of the evidence, the police doesn't have any clarity on who was behind this incident and why they did it. This remains an unsolved mystery. Obviously, with any other high-profile unsolved mystery, there could be a lot of theories on what could have happened, but what we are most interested to know is that what do you guys think about this case? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe,